This week on Q&A, our guest is Randall Robinson, author of An Unbroken Agony, Haiti, From Revolution to the Kidnapping of a President.
Randall Robinson, you have a quote that a friend of yours said to you in your book on Haiti. Randall, you've got to let go of this Haiti thing. I mean, you've just got to let go. Where was that?
We had Harvard Black Law students, Harvard Black alumni had a program there, and I was honored, and I was asked to speak, and a lot of my remarks were about Haiti. This fellow he's a very successful lawyer in Chicago, perhaps more of a businessman than a lawyer. Nice fellow. I like him a great deal, but he doesn't know anything about Haiti or the large significance of it, and the significance of what he does not know. And of course, that's been cleverly engineered as well. And somehow I'd irritated him, and he couldn't contain it. And I'd raked over something that bothered him. And he said, "You've just got to let this thing go." And it bothered me a great deal that he would say something like that. And it was kind of fruit of ignorance that I think cripples so many Americans about a situation we all ought to know a great deal more about.
I'll get back to this book in a moment, but you wrote a book called Quitting America. At the time, talked a lot about leaving this country, going to St. Kitts. What's the impact been on you? When did you do it? And do you still have any connection to the United States at all?
Yes, I have some. My mother and family here. My mother's 93. I come back to see her. My sisters are here in Washington. I come back from time to time to see them. My wife is from St. Kitts, and so it was a very comfortable move. We've been going there for 20 years before we decided to move there. It's terribly different from this kind of society. It's exquisitely beautiful, stunningly so. It is a culture that is not at all commodified. So it is very unlike this one. It's not narcissistic like this one is. It's left off some world maps. There are only 35,000 people there. But it affords a kind of intimacy with people you rush past in a big place. And so it's been very good for me. And I love it. It allows, I think, people who are of a spiritual type to learn how to simply be and to become self-examining and to relate in a more humane way to other people. And so it's been wonderful for me.
What was the impact of that book that you wrote, which was, as you know, people characterize it as being angry, but you say, I read somewhere in an interview, that you personally are not angry, that you are happy.
I'm extremely happy, and people who disagree with me have observed often that a lot of my books are angry. Somehow, what people disagree with becomes a rant to them. I'm not angry, but I suppose in a certain way I'm angry about a certain experience. Were I not angry, I'd be a lunatic. Sometimes anger is appropriate. It's the appropriate response to things that that are done that are cruel and wrongful. But it's not the kind of anger that boils my insides or makes me a less balanced or thoughtful person. No, not at all. I wouldn't think so.
Let's add up a couple quick things for, say, someone who's never heard of you. How many years with TransAfrica that you founded?
25 years.
What was the purpose of TransAfrica?
TransAfrica was to galvanize African American support for American policy towards Africa and the Caribbean that were constructive policies and opposition to policies that were not. And that's what I did for 25 years.
When did you quit?
6 years ago, when we left, and I simply wanted to take some time to write. I'll be 66 years old tomorrow, and so time passes. I wanted to think about things, and I wanted to live in a different place. I also wanted to have an experience that was unmarked by the burden of race. It is a preoccupation of African Americans in an era where mainstream America doesn't like to talk about things that aren't pleasant to it. It doesn't like to talk about the 700,000 Iraqis that have died in this war. Doesn't like to talk about what has happened to Native Americans. Doesn't like to talk about the prison industrial complex and how this is a derivative of slavery. 1 out of 8 prisoners in the world is an African American, and what that means for the future of African Americans. Doesn't like to talk about things like that. And it's a wrenching thing to live in a country that really, in ways that are important and central, is not a welcoming space for you. Well, in St. Kitts, you don't think about these things all the time. We also wanted our daughter, I think, to have a happy adolescence. She had always been a very good student, but you only have one adolescence, and it ought to be pleasant. And it's a very difficult thing for young black men and women in private schools in the nation's capital. You may get a good education, but you may not be so happy when you're getting it. And so she went to high school in St. Kitts.
Why may you not be so happy?
Well, one, there's in a society with a history like America's that does not want to talk about slavery and the continuing consequences of it, does not want to talk about continuing discrimination, does not want to talk about the things that bother various elements of America's populace. And so having a social experience in that kind of space is not always comfortable and easy. I do think the school she went to went out of its way to make its black students comfortable. But it wasn't our culture. One shouldn't have to make oneself over into something else. We ought to all celebrate each other's culture. We should celebrate each other's histories. I mean, we should know as much about Africa in its antiquity as we know about Greece in its antiquity, for the mutual benefit of all of us. But we don't do that. We should know as much about the sort of circular